We're not interested in having the Navy stop training, but rather that they go forward and limit the activities that could harm whales.
A public hearing tonight on whether the Navy is doing enough to mitigate potential harm to marine mammals during training exercises off the coast of San Diego.
We basically had no trailers and no donations in the warehouse. We were all standing around looking at each other and saying, how did this happen?
Donations are down as the Salvation Army gears up for their biggest fundraising campaign of the year. And starting tonight, one of the most comprehensive reviews of America's Wall, the first part of a KPBS and inewsource investigation into the current wall at the border. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. Prototypes of what President Trump's proposed wall might look like have gone up in Otay Mesa. They cost nearly $4 million. The massive new effort to secure the border has prompted KPBS and inewsource to obtain the most detailed government records of the existing border barriers ever released. They've allowed us to map whether the barriers have been doing their job over time, stopping drug trafficking and flows of people. KPBS investigative reporter Jean Guerrero is at the border with more on a special series we're calling America's Wall. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Ebony. I'm here at Borderfield State Park, where behind me you can see the two fences that separate San Diego from Tijuana. It's here that President Trump plans to start his wall, by rebuilding 14 miles of fencing starting at the coast. And it's these reconstruction plans that motivated KPBS and inewsource to take a look at the existing wall, to find out what it looks like, where it is exactly, and whether or not it's been doing its job. Here's our story.
Our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more.
The United States must secure its borders. This is a basic responsibility of a sovereign nation.
We have strengthened border security beyond what many believed was possible.
This isn't President Trump's wall. This is America's wall.
We're going to have strong, incredible borders. We're going to build a wall. It's going to be built.
As President Trump looks to build an impenetrable wall, so far only prototypes have been built. For now, his administration has scaled back plans to lengthen the border and instead plans to focus on rebuilding existing barriers, starting in San Diego. So KPBS and inewsource teamed up to examine those existing barriers, using what we believe is the most comprehensive data that's ever been released. We wanted to find out if the wall has been doing its job of reducing illegal immigration and drug trafficking. Using multiple Freedom of Information Act requests, we layered information about the wall's construction over time with other records. Our data shows a conspicuous pattern. Over time, America's Wall has reduced smuggling wherever it's been built. But it has shifted those flows into gaps between the barriers, into the ocean, into the sky, and even underground.
The reality is that the wall simply ensures that there will be ever more creative ways of getting around it.
It's largely symbolic because it has not actually stopped the flows. It has redirected those flows, but it gives politicians a very nice backdrop for a photo op to say, look, I'm doing something.
Here's an example. San Diego doubled its fencing under President Clinton in the 90s. As a result, in the neighboring El Centro sector, the share of apprehensions rose 500%. Smugglers also started building tunnels under the fence. Tunnel detection peaked in 2009, the same year that fence construction began to plateau under the Bush administration. There were more than 3 times more tunnels discovered that year than through the entire 1990s.
It's like a giant game of whack-a-mole, right? They whack them over here and they pop up over there.
Apprehensions in the Pacific Ocean also increased that year by 74%. Smugglers have also used drones, catapults, ramps, and taller ladders. The border between the U.S. and Mexico has existed since 1848. That's when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War. But for more than 100 years, the border existed only on paper, with the exception of some barbed wire to stop Mexican cattle from grazing on American crops. Today, the wall is made of different materials, all meant to do different things. For example, pedestrian fencing. Comprising about 400 miles of the border, it's meant to stop people from getting into the U.S. It will usually stop vehicles, too. Then there's what's called vehicle fencing. It stretches approximately 300 miles and is meant to stop cars from driving through. In all, there's 653 miles of fencing along the 2,000-mile border, and most of it is pretty new. About 97% of America's wall was built during the past 3 administrations. Most of that came after 2005, when the Department of Homeland Security acquired the authority to waive environmental laws for wall construction. It cost about $7 billion to build. Trump's wall is expected to cost upwards of $20 billion. Joshua Wilson of the National Border Patrol Council says one of the biggest vulnerabilities for the wall is the thousands of miles of coastline.
We've had people try and swim across, surf across, scuba dive, jet ski. There's no end to the creativity of the people trying to come here illegally.
But he says more and improved barriers will help Border Patrol agents do their job more effectively by making it harder to cross on land.
It was much harder to control the area before the primary fencing. The human smuggling organizations basically ran wild.
Some researchers say focusing construction in San Diego shows that the purpose is more political than practical. San Diego already has 2 fences, but it's the most populous part of the border, the most visible place to build a wall.
Part of the allure of building in San Diego is that it is really the capital of the border. It's the largest city on the border. It's a place where a lot of people are going to take notice of this project.
He says that unless the Trump administration can address the gaps in America's wall, the patterns in its history will likely repeat. Jean Guerrero, KPBS
News. So, Jean, what's the next step to build this new border wall?
So now the prototypes that we just saw go up in Otay Mesa are going to go through their testing phase, which starts anywhere between 2 and 3 weeks from now and will last anywhere between 2 and 3 months. They're going to test them for their ability to resist climbing, their ability to resist tunneling underneath, and their ability to resist breaches with things like cutting torches. But there's still no guarantee that the wall will be built. That entirely depends on funding, so whether or not the prototypes will be used to lengthen the wall and to replace other barriers.
Jean Guerrero reporting at the border. Thank you very much. The America's Wall series is a KPBS and inewsource collaboration. It features an interactive map, videos, and graphics that help tell the story of the U.S.-Mexico border wall. I spoke with inewsource reporter Leonardo Castaneda about the data behind the story. Leonardo, tell us about America's Wall.
What we found is that America's Wall is not just a wall. It's a collection, more than 3,600 little pieces of wall. And using this data that we got through a Freedom of Information request from the United States Customs and Border Protection, we think it's the first time this data has ever been released. We were able to map it and see where it is, and just as importantly, where it isn't.
So where is it and where isn't it?
What we found is that California, Arizona, New Mexico, those states have a lot of fencing. They have secondary fencing, which means some parts of the wall have a secondary or a backup wall. And a lot of that fencing is fairly new. And then what we found is that Texas, for the most part, is unfenced. It's the longest border with Mexico, but it's the state that has some of the least fencing.
And you found through your research that America's Wall, for the most part, is relatively new construction. Can you talk about that?
That's right. What we found is that about 90% of it has been built in the last 12 years, and that's something that users can actually explore using the interactive map that we built. They can zoom in and see where the fencing is. For example, they could zoom into San Diego and see where that secondary fencing that we were talking about is. And they can click around and see when was that fencing built. They can also travel to specific years. For example, they can look at 2008, which is a year most of the fencing was built, and see kind of how that fencing came into being in those late years of the 2000s.
So the idea is a more secure border between the U.S. and Mexico would stop illegal immigration. Any indication that the existing fence has impacted immigration?
That's right. For the last 20 years, a strong wall has been a key component of every immigration strategy that Democratic and Republican presidents have endorsed. And what we've seen is that wherever fencing is built, we do see a decline in immigration in that area. But you don't see a total decline in immigration throughout the entire border. So those migrants, as San Diego, for example, gets more fence, they don't stop crossing. They just cross through El Centro or Arizona or Texas. That's something that we can see, and that's something that plays into this trend that we've seen, which you can see here, which is since 2000, migration has been declining pretty markedly, even before this huge boom in construction started in the late 2000s.
So now there's talks and plans for more construction. Any indication that an additional fencing and wall would help to stop illegal border crossings?
It's hard to know. I think what we can understand from our data is that wherever that fencing is built, there's a good chance that migration, illegal entry will decrease, especially if it's an area that's not already fenced. For example, San Diego, it already has a very strong fence. It has already very low migration. Whether it will decrease migration totally, it's unlikely. People will find alternative routes. There's areas of the border, for example, in Texas, where the Rio Grande makes it very difficult to fence. Those areas, people will still be able to cross. However, what we're seeing is, like we were saying, people are just not coming as often. We're seeing numbers of illegal migration that we haven't seen since the early 70s. So it's very likely that in the coming years, we'll see decreasing migration, whether the border wall is expanded or not.
Leo, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
America's Wall is a collaboration with inewsource, an independent nonprofit partner of KPBS. Tomorrow, we'll hear from a 78-year-old retired mechanic who patrols his remote property in East County for people who are trying to enter the U.S. illegally.
I consider myself an American citizen. Most people don't anymore. I love my country. I believe in the Constitution. It is my duty to protect my country from people invading it.
For the full series on America's Wall, head to our website, kpbs.org, or go to inewsource.org. The San Diego City Council is scheduled to vote tomorrow on a funding plan for industrial tents to temporarily house the homeless. The council will decide whether or not to reallocate $6.5 million currently dedicated to permanent housing and homeless services. The tent shelters are expected to cost the city more than $1 million a month. Qualcomm has rejected a more than $100 billion takeover bid. The unsolicited offer comes from the Singapore-based Broadcom, which Qualcomm says dramatically undervalues the company. If Broadcom had been successful, the combined company would have been the third largest chip maker in the world, behind Intel and Samsung. Qualcomm executives say the deal would have faced significant regulatory concerns. The Navy is holding a hearing tonight to gather public comment about its plan to manage potential damage to whales and other marine life during its training exercises off Southern California. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh is in Point Loma at the public hearing. Steve?
That's right, Ebony. So I'm at the United Portuguese Hall here on Point Loma. This is the only public hearing scheduled for San Diego for the Navy's draft environmental impact statement for the waters around San Diego and Hawaii. In a minute, we're going to talk to a representative from the Navy. In the meantime, earlier I talked to one of the environmentalists that sued the Navy the last time this came up for review. Under federal law, the Navy is required to manage the potential damage to wildlife in the busy training ranges between San Diego and Hawaii. In 2015, a decision in a lawsuit brought by environmental groups required the Navy to avoid certain migration routes and other sensitive habitat. Mioka Sakoshte is with the Center for Biological Diversity.
We're not interested in having the Navy stop training, but rather that they go forward and limit the activities that can harm whales, like the active sonar use and the explosives in the really core areas like foraging areas and breeding areas.
Sonar has been linked to hearing loss among marine mammals. Environmental groups want to see stronger restrictions on activity around known breeding grounds and migration areas in the waters from Hawaii to San Diego. So this public hearing started right at 5 o'clock, and I have with me Alex Stone. He's the project manager for the Navy's draft environmental impact statement for the waters around San Diego and Hawaii. Alex, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So the last time this came up, the Navy said that sonar and explosives could cause anywhere up to 200 deaths and 1,600 injuries among marine mammals a year. What have you done to try to mitigate that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, that's probably one of the things that's most critical to the whole project is the mitigation measures, something we're very proud of. We've really taken a look at all of the activities. Anytime where we identify there could be an environmental impact, we do whatever we possibly can to minimize the environmental impact while still doing that critical mission that we have for training and testing.
And the impact of sonar, how are things changing this time around in this report, and how does sonar play into that?
Yeah, so what's new in this time is we've updated the science with the best available science. We're not fundamentally changing the activities. There's no large increase in the activities, either the type of activities, the amount of activity, or the location. Everything that we're doing in the EIS is really the same areas, the same type of training and testing that the Navy has been doing around San Diego for decades.
But the amount of how you're mitigating that, what are you doing?
Yeah, so a lot of the mitigation measures are continuation of mitigation measures that we've developed over the years. Procedural mitigation measures, like I talked about, where we avoid impacts, we shut down sonar if marine mammals are close. We have some additional mitigation measures that we're proposing in the draft EIS, and those are around specific geographic area where we would have limitations on activities in certain biologically important areas.
All right, well, thanks, Alex. So the final report is expected to be due out this summer. The new plan would go into effect at the end of 2018. Reporting live from Point Loma, Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
Thanks, Steve. San Diego Gas and Electric is California's leader when it comes to renewable energy. The new state report shows renewables make up more than 43% of the total energy obtained by SDG&E. That's more than Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison. The state goal for consumer sale of renewable energy is 33% by 2020. The report shows SDG&E may reach 50%. A chance of rain later this week in parts of San Diego. Jeff Cornish has a closer look in tonight's forecast.
It's very active to our north. A strong series of Pacific storms are crashing into parts of Washington and southern parts of British Columbia north of the border. And this most recent one today is staying well to our north. Now, it is bringing some onshore flow, and with that, we often deal with low clouds in the late night hours, early morning hours, some fog, and then we'll be dealing with that into Tuesday morning. But as we look ahead in our local forecast, there will be a few spotty showers sneaking in some areas, Thursday, I should say, Thursday into Friday morning. So that's our best opportunity for a shower. But there is some cloud cover, some upper level clouds streaming across the area. The clouds are a little thicker to our south. And as we take a look at the broader view, you can see all the rain and even a little mountain snow, but mainly rain in this view from northern California up into Washington and Oregon. It is a very windy day in parts of western Oregon and Washington, just a little breezy for us. Tonight, 57 degrees, partly cloudy, clouds thickening, and we'll see some of those low clouds march in to the coastal regions into the early morning hours of Tuesday. 57 for your low in San Diego. Oceanside, 47. Not bad. Borrego Springs, 56, and in Ramona, we're around 43. This will be a fairly tranquil Tuesday for us. High pressure will be in charge. We have dry air still lingering despite the fact that, at least near the coast, there will be some murky low clouds in the morning tied to that onshore breeze. And eventually we'll see the sunshine win out in most areas into the afternoon. Into San Diego, we're on track for 73. Borrego Springs, 87. Not off the charts hot. Mount Laguna, 66 there in the higher elevations. So your coastal forecast, we'll see at least some clouds in the morning and then a lot of sunshine for the middle and latter part of the day. We'll match the forecast high of 73 both Tuesday and Wednesday. Maybe a degree warmer Thursday. And there could be a brief shower in some spots into Thursday night. As we look at the inland areas, we're a little warmer here, 81 down to 80. Mix of some morning clouds and a lot of afternoon sunshine. Into the mountainous areas, we'll be cooling down a bit later in the week, maybe a fleeting shower Thursday night there. And into the deserts, we're warm but not overly hot, back into the upper 70s Friday. I'm Jeff Cornish, KPBS News.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, a fifth woman accuses Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore of sexual misconduct. The political fallout at 7, right after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Starting today, you'll start seeing the Salvation Army bell ringers outside of stores with their little red kettles. The organization is kicking off its largest fundraising campaign of the year. But KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman tells us another Salvation Army program is struggling.
Last year we were at about 850,000, and so we're hoping to see an increase to about 900,000 this year.
Salvation Army Major George Baker says these red kettles are the organization's largest fundraiser, with bell ringers at 150 San Diego County stores through December 23rd.
Initially, it goes to help pay for our holiday assistance programs, to help provide food and toys for needy families and children, to help with our large feeding programs that we do on Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. But then after that, it helps to support our ongoing social service programs.
One program the Red Kettle Drive does not help, however, is the Salvation Army's Adult Rehabilitation Center, or ARC program. They rely solely on donations of clothing and used goods, and those donations are way down.
We basically had no trailers and no donations in the warehouse. We were all standing around looking at each other and saying, how did this happen?
James Derlin is the center's production manager and says donated items are sold at 7 thrift stores in the county.
Those 7 stores have to pay for the program.
He says every 6 months, the rehabilitation program takes in 127 people recovering from drug or alcohol addiction.
The men and women come to us with basically nothing on their back. We do not charge them anything.
A former drug and alcohol abuser, Derlin went through the 6-month rehabilitation program himself and wants to see it continue.
That's what I think about every day. I have to make sure that this place stays afloat and functioning for that person that was hopeless and lost like I was 8 years ago, or actually 9 years ago. I don't know what would happen to me. I don't know if I'd be alive.
Derlin says normally there is a downturn in non-cash donations during this time of year, but he says it's never been this low, and he's worried about what it could mean for the center.
There's a lot of things they're talking about, and reduction in services or reduction in the ability to have as many minutes we do have, So, a lot of things are on the table when the money's not there.
Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
An emotional meeting for a pair forever linked by a face transplant. AP reporter Krista Fourier shows us the widow who touched the face that once belonged to her husband.
Two people united by tragedy as Lily Ross hugs the man bearing the face of her husband who killed himself last year.
How are you?
Good, you? Since everything's happened, he's family.
16 months after transplant surgery gave Andy Sandness a second chance, he finally met Ross, the woman who agreed to donate her husband's face.
A lot of emotion. You're happy, but at the same time you're sad because you know that they've lost somebody that meant a lot to them.
It felt good to be able to finally meet him.
The two came together recently in a meeting arranged by the Mayo Clinic, where Sandness underwent a 56-hour surgery in the clinic's first face transplant. Dr. Samir Mardini led the team of more than 60 medical professionals. He says the two men looked so similar they could have been related.
In so many ways, this was a meant to be transplant, as Andy and Rudy had extreme similarities in the facial skin color, the structure of the face, the size of the face.
All you can do is just prove to them that they made the right decision in the donation.
In 2006, the Wyoming native put a rifle below his chin and pulled the trigger, destroying most of his face. A decade later, Kalen Rudy Ross killed himself while his wife was 8 months pregnant.
When I found out how he had passed, it gave me chills.
More than a year after the surgery, Sandness still embraces the small victories he never thought possible after he disfigured his face.
You can stand in the elevator and not have to hide your face because you're scared that you're scaring other people. And it's just, now I'm able to go chew food, go sit down in restaurants, and just, it's been unbelievable.
He will always have to live with the risk of complications. He is on a daily regimen of anti-rejection medication and is constantly working to retrain his nerves to operate in sync with his new face. Though initially apprehensive about the meeting,
I was scared.
Ross now says she and Sandness hope to stay a part of each other's lives.
Everything happened so fast, and it was hard. With meeting Eddie, it has finally given me closure.
Ross says she is hopeful that her son Leonard will one day understand how his father ended up helping someone else, finding solace in the midst of loss. Krista Fourier, Associated Press.
Sand, surf, and murals. Encinitas just got a bit brighter. These are images from this weekend's Encinitas Music Mural Ceremony. The new mural is on the side of Leucadia Poorhouse. Muralist Michael Rosenblatt dedicated the art to musicians. This comes on the heels of other Encinitas mural projects that have also worked to add color to blank spaces and celebrate the city's beach lifestyle. Art advocates hope this latest mural will encourage more businesses to open their walls to art. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.